Hey guys, so it's me Alexis. Welcome back to my astrology channel, and today I'm going to be covering the Venus in Gemini. So before I go ahead and start the video, I just want to let you guys know that like always I will be putting up a poll after this video is posted so that you guys can vote for the next sign. And then I also offer astrology and tarot readings, so if you guys like my stuff, you guys can kind of go ahead and check the link below and schedule something with me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the Venus in Gemini. So Gemini is going to be an air sign ruled by Mercury, and it's also a mutable sign. So when you have a sign that's made of air is hot and wet, and in other words that means external connections. That's why writing and speaking and communicating is something really tied to air. Rationality and mental processes, like the mind is usually tied to air. And then on top of that, Gemini is a mutable sign, meaning that Geminis are very flexible. They can kind of adapt to many situations, and because they're flexible and adaptable, they're really good at accepting the way things are. They're not going to try to beat the flow. They're not trying to stop the flow. They kind of just go with the flow. Now, since Gemini is a mutable sign, they're not cardinal or fixed, so they're not going to be really good at starting things, and they're not going to be really good at sustaining things. But when it comes to kind of getting into the groove of things, Geminis are really good at that. And then Gemini is going to be ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is the sign of writing, communicating, exchanging, all that stuff. When I think of Mercury's core function, I think of exchange. If Venus's core function is like connecting and then Mars is separating, Mercury is exchanging. So like when I think of Mercury, Mercury is kind of like neutral, but like a chaotic neutral, because with Mercury there is a trickster kind of aspect to it where you think you know what Mercury's doing, you think you know what Mercury's gonna be, what Mercury's gonna do next, but you really don't. And I think Gemini really plays into that trickster, childish, kind of curious kind of aspect of Mercury. Now, Venus is going to be the planet of connection. Like I said before in all of my videos, Venus is the planet of like relationships and connecting, pleasure, beauty, attraction, stuff like that. So when you kind of combine Gemini and then Venus together, you get a very, interesting person. So let me go ahead and kind of, describe it. The first thing that a Gemini Venus is that Gemini Venuses are not cheaters. I'm going to say this because I think one of the first threads I've ever made on my Twitter, it was like astrology pet peeves, and one of the biggest pet peeves that I remember is people automatically assuming that certain Venus signs are cheaters. Now, Venus moves slower than the sun. The sun kind of transits in each sign for about 30 days. A lot of people are born in 30 days, and Venus takes even longer. So to kind of state specifically that a certain Venus placement is a cheater is kind of wrong. So I want to go ahead and put that out there because Gemini Venus is probably the first placement like people think of when they think of cheaters, because they're just like, oh, Gemini, they're flexible, they're playful, and they have a short attention span. Yeah, that sounds like a cheater to me. And it just kind of bugs me because that's a big pool of people that you're accusing of being cheaters, and it's not rationally correct, and why would you even say that? So that's the first thing I want to tell you guys. The first thing about Gemini Venus is that that doesn't being a Gemini's Venus doesn't automatically make you a cheater. I think it's your character that largely determines on whether you're a cheater or not, or whatever. I do want to say this though. If you are watching this video and you are currently, dating, or you're pursuing a Gemini Venus, and you're kind of sitting here and you're kind of like, how can I attract a Gemini Venus? The first thing I want to tell you is, first of all, don't be boring. And you're looking at me like, okay, how do I not be boring? There's several ways to not be boring. Now, Gemini Venuses, I think out of all the Venus signs, I think Gemini Venuses are kind of the hardest signs to attract. And you may disagree with me, you may say like, oh, Scorpio is the hardest one. No, with Scorpio Venus, you just gotta be vulnerable and be real, which is pretty easy for me. But but for a Gemini Venus, you have to be interesting. People think that it's hard to be vulnerable. People think it's hard to, yes, it's hard to open up, it's hard to be weak, it's hard to be vulnerable, but I think it's so much harder to be interesting. And that's what you gotta be if you want to attract a Gemini Venus. If you can't carry a conversation, if you're not open-minded, if you're not curious, if you're not intelligent, that's like the biggest Gemini Venus turnoff. Like, I really think that when it comes to relationships, Gemini Venuses really value intelligence. They do not want to date a person they think is stupid and boring and narrow-minded. So, you know, if you're ever on a date with a Gemini Venus, be ready to talk a lot, be ready to, you know, pick at their mind, be ready to kind of intrigue them. I think that's the number one thing you gotta do. If you want to attract a Gemini Venus, you have to intrigue them. You have to like grab their attention more than a minute or so. Because like for a Gemini Venus, you know, they are curious people, especially in love. And for them, they know that, like, you know, when it comes to love, there's so many good people out there. There's so many great attractions, so many great pleasures out there. And for the Gemini Venus, they're just kind of like, you know, I want to enjoy what I got. I want to enjoy all of it. And if you're not going to, you know, display what they want, they will move on to the next person. And I don't think that's a bad thing because, you know, you can't settle for less in life. So, you know, if you're watching and you want to, you know, get with a Gemini Venus, don't be boring. Now, the second thing, if you want to be with a Gemini Venus, is, you know, communication. Like, you know, you heard the old, like, cheesy phrase, communication is key. You know, out of all the cheesy phrases I've ever heard about relationships, that phrase is probably one of the most important phrases ever in a relationship. And this so strongly applies to a Gemini Venus because a lot of how a Gemini Venus will express their love is probably going to be verbal. They're probably going to express their love to you in such a way where it's understandable. I think the worst thing that you can do to a Gemini Venus is to misunderstand them. For a Gemini Venus, I think that good feeling when you feel understood and when things kind of make sense, like that is the feeling that you want to give to your Gemini Venus because they're going to like that. And part of doing that requires understanding, which comes from communication. If you want good understanding and good communication, you gotta communicate. So, again, if you're watching this video and you really want to get into a Gemini Venus's pants, you gotta talk your way through it. And honestly, you might have to do that literally. Now, if you are a Gemini Venus and you're watching this and you're just kind of like, yep, that's kind of how you attract me, I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk about you guys and how you kind of, you know, go ahead and kind of, you know, do your love stuff. Now, well, actually, maybe I should move on to the part where I already like criticize you guys, because, you know, with every placement, you know, it's not, you know, 100% positive, and, you know, I try my best to keep it real on, you know, on this channel. So, Gemini. You know the phrase, like, you know, since I already said communication is key, I'm going to give you guys another cheesy phrase. This other one is curiosity killed the cat. Yes, this statement applies to you. Because for you, you know, since you're a Gemini Venus, you're very curious, you like to learn new things, you like to communicate, you're a very fun lover. Like, don't get me wrong, like, if there's anything that you're not going to give to any of your partners, it's going to be boredom. However, you know, curiosity killed the cat. And I just want to say that, you know, when it comes to love, I have this feeling where you're kind of like, you know, I don't want my relationships to be boring. I don't want it to be stale, Alexis. I don't want this relationship to just, you know, be the bane of my existence because it's so goddamn boring. Now, I think there is one thing that you do need to learn to kind of implement into your relationships, and I think that's going to be grounding. And grounding, like, literally, like, in terms of, you know, being more practical, and then grounding in terms of, like, you know, seeing things actually, like, manifest. Because sometimes, you know, with the Gemini Venus, like, again, you're ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is the planet of the mind. Sometimes, you know, you kind of think too much in your head when it comes to love. Sometimes it kind of feels like a dream or like a story. So I think one of the worst things you could do, Gemini, is, you know, kind of like illustrate your love story like it's an actual story, and then getting mad whenever that story doesn't play out. Because when I think of Gemini, I also think of storytellers, because, you know, in order to create a good argument, in order to, you know, initiate understanding in the first place, you have to create something that is logical and rational, something where someone can at least kind of follow. And sometimes for you, you can kind of take that notion too far and kind of rationally, like, you know, explain or kind of, you know, create a relationship where, like, it has to be completely, like, theoretical, or it has to follow a certain pathway in your mind so that it kind of makes sense, so that you can enjoy that pleasure. And, you know, my, you know, little tidbit for you is that, you know, sometimes you gotta trust that, you know, at the end of the day, if, you know, if your love story isn't understandable, if it's just a bunch of mush, it's incoherent, and it's really terrifying because like you're trying to understand it, trust that in the lack of understanding and rationality, your relationship will still go through. Because I guess there's this part of you where it's like, you know, if I don't understand my relationship, if I don't really know what's going on, if I don't have a rational or logical or, you know, an easy to follow explanation for where this relationship is going, then I don't have, you know, a lot of hope in this relationship. I think, you know, Gemini, in order for you to really trust in a relationship, you gotta get ready for things to not really make a lot of sense. And then, you know, I really did not talk about the curiosity killed the cat kind of phrase, so I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it now. When it comes to curiosity killed the cat, you know, sometimes people can be too curious to the point where, like, you know, their curiosity screws them over. Maybe they're too curious and they go into a situation and it really, you know, screws them over. So Gemini Venus, when it comes to like, you know, thinking about all of the great things that the world has to offer for you, you know, if you keep on trying to get everything and all the things, if you keep on trying to enjoy everything out there, the thing is, if you try to do that, that means low-key, deep down, you really do not truly, deeply enjoy anything. And because of that, what I ask of you is to trust that, like, you can enjoy one thing in your relationship really deeply to the point where you don't really need to know anything else. And now for you, I mean, if you're a Gemini Venus watching this, you're probably thinking like, ew, why would you just settle on one thing when there's so much more out there? What I would like to ask you is, you know, why do you need everything? Why is it so hard for you to be satisfied? What will it take for you, for your curiosity to be satisfied? Because at the end of the day, a relationship is a connection. And, you know, it takes effort and energy and love to sustain that connection. And if you're trying to, you know, invest everywhere else and trying to enjoy everything else, but like expect for your relationship to work, like, come on, Gemini, even you know that doesn't make sense. So Gemini, you know, it's okay to be grounded, and it's also okay for things to not make sense either. That's kind of the main gist of what I wanted to tell you guys. So yeah, that is pretty much my video for the Venus and Gemini. Again, I will be putting up a poll after this video is posted so that you guys can kind of go ahead and vote for the next sign. And I do also offer astrology and tarot consultations. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next week.